Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the November Broadband Breakfast Club, the Smart Grid and Broadband. And now we'll introduce, I'll thank our sponsors. Comcast, ICF International, Intel, Google, the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, NCTA, and the Telecommunications Industry Association, TIA, and US Telecom. Please join in thanking the sponsors of the Broadband Breakfast Club. Now I'll just introduce our keynote speaker, Nick Sinai. He's the Senior Advisor to the Chief Technology Officer, Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the White House Office of Science and Technology. Previously, Nick was the Director of Environment and Energy at the FCC for the Omnibus Broadband Initiative. And in fact, he gave the keynote speech here when in that position. Nick previously served as also executive and advisory roles in clean energy technology organizations and from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Previously also, he worked in private equity and as a management consultant in communications and media. Please join me in welcoming Nick Sinai.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm excited to be here yet again at Broadband Breakfast to talk about two topics near and dear to my heart, broadband and smart grid. So today I want to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about what the Obama administration is doing at a federal level to help support a secure and modern energy system for this country, especially when it comes to the grid. A smarter, modernized, and expanded grid will be pivotal, to the United States world leadership in a clean energy future. But as you all know, today's grid is an aging patchwork, with apologies to our Pepco friends here. Most of the traditional electricity infrastructure has changed little from the original design and form of the electric grid as envisioned by Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse at the end of the 19th century. We've added some modest communications. We've expanded the grid, but fundamentally it's still very much an analog grid. We know that if we want to continue to make progress in clean energy, if we want to improve reliability, if we want to bring renewables and electric vehicles at scale, we're going to need a smarter, modern, and expanded electric grid. The bottom line is we can't have a 21st century clean energy economy with a 20th century grid. So the administration invested $4.5 billion in Recovery Act across 140 projects across 46 states to help build a more stable, secure electric grid that increases access to renewable energy and can help offer the opportunity for consumers to cut their utility bills. And this summer, after about a year process in which many of you participated, we released a policy framework for the 21st century grid. It provides a roadmap for state regulators, for the industry, and for all Americans to benefit from investments in this nation's electric infrastructure. So let me talk a little bit about the policy framework. It focuses on better aligning economic incentives for smart grid technologies, increasing our attention to setting standards, and creating better interoperability, securing the grid from cyber attacks, and giving consumers better information about their energy use. Smart grid technologies are also a part of the President's commitment to support energy efficiency and economic growth in rural America. Last month, Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack announced more than $150 million in smart grid investments across 33 states to support rural infrastructure smart grid through RUS loans. So many Americans are willing to take steps to reduce their energy use and lower their utility bills. They just don't have the information that they need to And so we're putting information in the hands of consumers in a way they can use. So, for example, I wanted to call attention to what my boss, US CTO Anish Chopra, he challenged the utility industry in September to develop a green button. That is to make energy data available to consumers in standard machine-readable formats. And I'm pleased to say that the 3 large California utilities have publicly committed to doing so by the end of the year. And we think it's really exciting from an energy innovation perspective. Because whether it's an energy efficiency app, whether on a smartphone, whether it's a broadband-enabled thermostat, or just thinking about a photovoltaic installer and kind of right-sizing the right panels, unlocking energy data, detailed smart meter data in computer-friendly formats is really important to jump-starting all of this innovation that is possible. And so this is a broadband breakfast, and we should probably be talking about broadband. So I want to make a couple observations. First, as I observed last year, the smart grid increasingly needs broadband. And so you can think about synchrophasers that are measuring current and voltage 30 times per second. And we're increasing, the Recovery Act is helping fund almost 1,000 of these sensors across the transmission grid that will help prevent a blackout like we had in 2003. Increasingly, sensors are also being put in substations. We have distribution automation, and broadband is making more progress there. And all of the advanced meters and endpoints at the homes and buildings, they're increasingly being backhauled by 3G, cellular, or wired broadband circuits. Second, I think wireless broadband offers new opportunities for utility crews to be more effective, more efficient, and even more green. Today, a lot of utility crews are using the land mobile radio and may have a backup commercial smartphone or something like that. That's actually not unlike the public safety challenge. I think there's tremendous opportunities for commercial broadband providers, wireless providers to offer services to crews and help them with the apps of the future and help for a more responsive utility crew, which really matters, as we've seen in Connecticut this last week. Now, there are opportunities to use commercial networks, opportunities to use public safety networks, and of course, opportunities to use private networks. And as you all know, all 3 happen today. All 3 will continue to happen in the future. And it's important that we try and use standards, private sector develop standards as much as possible so that we don't strand investment in any of those 3 options. And finally, one of the things that gets me most excited is we're moving to the Internet of Things. And smart grid, smart home, and smart buildings is a big piece of that. This pervasive connectivity is really exciting. It's going to help us reimagine the home and bring new types of competitors into energy and energy management markets. I think for broadband companies, we're already seeing broadband companies move into home security, and we're increasingly seeing them move into energy information and energy management, home automation, these blended value propositions. And I think that's what's really exciting about smart grid and smart buildings. And I don't necessarily draw a line from the grid to the building and the interplay between the two. I think there's tremendous opportunity for innovation for both young companies and big companies. And so I'm really excited if we make energy data more available in standard formats, and we really allow these companies to compete in the solutions in the homes and buildings. There's tremendous innovation possible and opportunities to help consumers save money, and it's really exciting times ahead. So I think I'll pause there, and looking forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
Thanks. Eliza Krigman, Politico. Could you speak to the administration's thoughts on privacy and security efforts in this space? Because surely that's also a concern with all this information on broadband.
Sure. So privacy and security are absolutely critical in smart grid. And as you'll see in the policy framework we put out June, in fact, one of the 4 key policy pillars was about securing the grid, both physical and from a cyber perspective. From a cyber perspective, the federal government needs to continue to provide threat information to industry, and industry needs to move from a compliance culture to one where there's active monitoring and assessment and response to threats. So from a cyber perspective, it's important that we get this right, and I'm confident that we're making good progress here. From a privacy perspective, smart grid privacy is an important issue, and if you don't do privacy right, it has the potential to backfire. So a lot of states are thinking about how to update the existing privacy rules they have in a utility context to smart grid. I will note that the flip side of privacy is data access, and so it makes sense oftentimes for states to be thinking about these in parallel rather than just a privacy proceeding, as some states have done, but to think about both the benefits to data access as well as the challenges of third-party access, which we believe strongly in, but you also have to have the right rules of the road.
Good morning, David Lowe with NTCA. In rural communities, we sometimes see the rural electric cooperative or the rural electric company overbuilding a telco footprint and vice versa. And in some cases, that redundancy may be a good thing. In other cases, that might be considered to be an expense that's not necessary. What is the government doing to help bring cooperation and collaboration to these two diverse groups in rural communities?
I think that's a really profound point when you think about rural America. There are great opportunities for collaboration between telcos and utilities, and there's also opportunities sometimes for unnecessary competition, and in other areas it's appropriate competition. And so I mean a lot of this comes down to the rural utility service, which is and the rural telecom folks at USDA who are working to coordinate a lot of the funding and loans, you know, state by state. But it may make sense in certain areas for there only to be a single provider of broadband services, and the most important thing would be to get coverage to that last 1%. And in those cases, we want to make sure that resources are appropriately targeted to support that kind of last mile, which is pretty expensive to fund.
Any other questions? Sorry.
Thank you. Tricia Paulette at Wiltshire Grannis. You mentioned that 3G networks, LMR, public safety, all can provide backhaul for smart grids, and all those groups obviously need spectrum badly. You know, the White House is back giving the D-blocked public safety, which takes that off the table for industry. So the priority band for new build-out in mobile broadband is, of course, the 1755 to 1780 band, you know, band 10 in the international standards world. So when is the White House going to tell DOD to clear off 1755 to 1780?
So this is the point in the conversation where I say I'm really sorry that our deputy CTO for telecom Tom Power was unable to attend because he was dying to give you a question, give you an answer to that question. I better stick to smart grid policy, especially when I'm on tape.
Any other questions? Okay, let's see.
Hi, it's Barry Goodstead. One of the missing ingredients in smart grid that I've always felt existed was that in most states in this country, there is no time of use rates, no time of use rate structure in place, nearly almost anywhere. And it seems to me that in order to unlock the real value of smart grid as a driver of conservation is to have those sorts of rates put into place by the states. And I thought that when the original smart grid grants came out, that was a requirement, but I'm not sure that was really implemented. Could you comment on where the government stands with respect to encouraging states to move in the direction of time of use rates?
So in the policy framework, in the policy framework we put out in June, we tried to be very clear that the federal role is not to tell the states what to do. We're here to provide guidance and coordination and technical assistance. In certain areas, the federal government has a important role, certainly in the cyber arena, in helping coordinate and promote interoperability standards, for example. So there are specific areas that the federal government will lean forward. When it comes to utility regulation and incentives and time of use or more dynamic pricing, those are thorny subjects at the state level. That said, we did say in pretty clear language in June that aligning incentives and experimenting with lifestyle rates or other dynamic rates allow for important innovation in this ecosystem. And so as much as the federal government can, we were supportive of states that are moving to use, whether it's time of use, whether it's critical peak time rebates. And there are thorny issues here, right? Whether you do opt-in or opt-out, how they're presented, what are the increased or maintained protections for different populations. So there are a thorny set of issues here. Ultimately, this discussion of more dynamic rates, I think, one, it impacts innovation because it does allow more apps and systems and building technologies to take advantage of this. And two, it is basic economics. That is, we're reflecting the true cost of power and kind of reducing implicit or hidden subsidies. And so we're certainly supportive of states that are making that move to it in ways that are consistent with the dialogue that they're having with their stakeholders, their public advocates, and their whole regulatory dialogue.
One more question?
Just a quick question. I'd like to take your temperature with regard to the bipartisan support of the smart grid, and just kind of give us, if you will, please, the pros and the cons from the various constituencies out there that are looking at the smart grid. Is it overall accepted as a good public policy, or is there contention there?
So the reason that's a great question is that there's no one smart grid, and so there's no one smart grid that makes sense, and so not all smart grid technology makes sense in all applications, and so it's I think this is kind of the thing to remember is that the federal government is supportive of solutions that work, that are cost effective, that are modernizing the system to improve reliability, that have opportunities to empower consumers and foster innovation. But we're not supportive of smart grid for smart grid's sake. Fundamentally, we're going to need to modernize the electric infrastructure. I mean, we're talking about, in the metering case, we're talking about electromechanical meters in many cases that are these spinning dials. And in most of your life, you don't encounter a lot of spinning dials and electromechanical devices. There are other parts of the grid and the transmission grid and other places that are more sophisticated today. And it really depends, because with 3,000 utilities, you may have had a utility that made some investments 5 or 10 years ago, and the cost-benefit case isn't there for a utility to make a certain set of investments. Some utilities have decided that the highest ROI or the best investments for them to modernize their grid have been in the transmission and distribution side of things, and really haven't been interested in metering or engaging consumers, and that's fine. And so each utility that is regulated will have this dialogue with their regulators. What we're trying to do is put forth some common principles, and we want to scale what works. So across the 140 projects that we're helping invest in, which range from demo to full deployment, we want to show the rest of the industry what is working and make sure that that can scale. I think a few of you may have seen that Secretary Chu announced a smart grid data access funding announcement for 10 to 12 communities to trial apps based upon energy data, and for the winner to get $2 million to scale. It's an example of the administration working to try and show the value to smart grid, but fundamentally it's going to depend state by state and utility by utility, you know, we want a smart grid that works for the American public, that provides more benefits in terms of reliability, in terms of being able to accommodate renewables and advanced vehicles, and is fundamentally a modern system for our 21st century economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Katie Fehrenbacher. She's the founding editor of Earth2Tech.com and a writer for GigaOM. She was previously a reporter for Red Herring, an editor for Engadget.com, and started her career as a reporter for the Yomiuri Shimbun, Japan's largest daily newspaper. Her work has appeared in the online editions of The Economist, the BBC, Forbes, Business Week, the New York Times, Fortune, CNN, and Sustainable Industries. Please join me in welcoming Katie Fehrenbacher.
Okay. Hi, I'm Katie Fehrenbacher. So I'm a senior writer for GigaOM, and then within GigaOM, we write about green tech as one of 7 or 8 different sectors, and so I run the green tech channel. And so I'm just going to welcome you guys to the stage. All of our esteemed panelists, Paul Hamilton, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs for Schneider Electric, Sneal Pancholi, Smart Grid Program Manager for Pepco. We've got Arkady Gurney, Senior Director for Policy and Partnerships with O-Power, and Jeffrey Dygart, Executive Director of Public Policy for AT&T. I don't think I missed anyone, right? So I'm really excited today to talk about the intersection of the smart grid and broadband. We're based in San Francisco, GigaOM is, and so I encounter a lot of companies in Silicon Valley and a lot of the startup ecosystem that is building different apps, different tools, new broadband thermostats. But I'm excited to come here and talk more about the bigger ecosystem and policy in general around how the smart grid and broadband are going to intersect, and how broadband is going to enable the smart grid, and what kind of killer apps and tools are going to come out of that. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about how your companies are intersecting with broadband and the smart grid. So let me start with you.
Great. Thanks, Katie. So let me tell you guys quickly what O-Power is. We're a relatively new company, about almost 5 years old. We work with utilities around the country to help them present information to their residential customers to allow those customers to save energy and save money on their bills. And we do that by producing on behalf of utilities home energy reports, which we send out to almost 10 million homes in the U.S. now, working with 60 utilities around the country. And what those reports tell you is how are you using energy compared to a anonymized group of neighbors in similarly sized homes. And basically what that opens up to folks is lets you know something that you wouldn't know from a utility bill, which is if you see it's $140 this month and you've used this many kilowatt hours, what does that mean? Are you doing well? Are you using a lot? Are you using a little? Can you understand why it's 30% more than it was the month before? And so we feel like we're opening that kind of information, giving people more context and control, and then also providing people based on how they use energy. And this is, we work with utilities that have traditional meters in place, but our product works better when utilities have smart meters in place, which is looking at the way people use energy, comparing it to how other people use energy, and comparing it to other information that we pull in, like weather data and parcel size and date of construction of a home, and give people very customized tips on how they could save energy. And when we run these programs with utilities, we always run them like a drug trial. So we have a treatment group of homes in the service area of the utility that get this information, and then a control group of homes that are not getting the information. And what we're looking for is when we present this customized, personalized information to people, does it make a difference in how they use energy? Good for us, it does. On average, when people get our reports, they become between 2 and 3% more efficient in how they're using energy in their homes. That may not sound like a lot, but when you do that across hundreds of thousands or millions of homes, it adds up to an enormous amount of energy. And the thing I wanted to emphasize about broadband and the smart grid is that there's a very one compelling vision of the smart grid is the idea of smart appliances in your home, a smart infrastructure, and those appliances communicating with the grid and doing things that people don't even notice in their homes, cycling the way the refrigerator operates, controlling the air conditioning, and essentially taking the homeowner or the tenant out of the loop. And there's a lot that's compelling about that vision. But I think that there's another vision, a complementary vision in some ways, and a contrasting vision in others, which is not about taking the person in the home out of the loop, but is about engaging that person. And I think if there's only a vision that is built around technology and that doesn't have an eye on engagement, it's not going to work. It's not only not going to work in terms of saving energy and having a more reliable electrical grid, it's not going to work in terms of building up public support for making these investments in the first place. And so the perspective that I think we bring to the industry is how can we present people information in a way that will improve their experience as customers of electricity or natural gas. And I think that's an important perspective as we think about what's the point of making all these investments. And I'll stop there.
So my name's Jeff Dygert. I work at AT&T, and this being Broadband Breakfast, we, as it turns out, are a broadband and communications company. The smart grid, as we all know, runs on communications, and where possible, we like to provide those. We have a variety of metering solutions that our metering partners and partnering utilities implement to get exactly the kind of consumer level information that we've been talking about. We also have a variety of distribution automation solutions that allow utilities to better see into the core of their network and manage that more efficiently and determine what's online and what's not and reroute power when necessary. We also work with a variety of third-party consumer vendors in this space when they need connectivity for their devices. Some of the companies that do things like OPower does sell SIM cards, little cellular connections embedded in their devices around the home. We provide connectivity for that. And then finally, we are looking at developing, or in the process of developing, our own home energy management system, which would hopefully be marketed to our wireline and broadband customers around the country as a way for them, once again, to get better information about how they're using their electricity and how they can be more efficient. So basically, at every step along the smart grid ecosphere where there's a need for communications, we're there and we hope to help.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Sunil Pancholi. I work for PHI, which is Pepco Holding Incorporated. Pepco is, or PHI has a very wide footprint. We are not only in Washington, D.C. and immediate Maryland area, we also operate in southern New Jersey, entire state of Delaware, and we are also on the east coast of Maryland. We have about 1.9 million customers. Couple years ago, through White House and of course Nick's and his boss's efforts, we did get 3 of the 100 smart grid investment grants, totaling about $175 million. Our vision of the smart grid is, again, everybody has a different vision. What is smart grid? If you ask 10 people, you may come out with 12 different opinions. But for us, our smart grid, and again, before I go into that, we had applied for the grants for entire footprint of our company. We did get the grants for Pepco DC, Pepco Maryland, and a part of New Jersey. Our vision of the smart grid is it would have AMI, that is advanced metering infrastructure. It will have direct load control. This would allow us immediately as well as into the future, as the federal and the state debate will settle as to what are the best ways for us to have the energy efficiencies, whether it is dynamic pricing, whether it is critical price, rebate, or peak pricing, whatever would be the debate. Right now we are building the roadway, which would allow us to essentially settle whatever we have to do over the next few 5-10 years. Again, AMI is one of our major component. Direct load control is another component. And we are also trying to improve our investment into our T&D network, which is distribution automation. And as part of this money, we are also doing communication infrastructure. And I'm sure probably there would be a couple questions as to what is our communication infrastructure. I would hold off that at least for the later. But what we also had felt when we were trying to apply for the grants, we knew that this is not just going to be just a technical project. We would have to see how we can educate the customer and also how can we educate our own employees. And again, our smart grid vision has 6 different components. I think with this, I would spare maybe anything else you may have for Q&A rather than I take up your time.
Paul Hamilton with Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric is a $28 billion energy management company. We are about over 100,000 people in 140 countries around the world. In the US, we're about $6 billion, 17,000 people, 40 factories, just to give you about a scope. It's about 25% of our business in our largest market. We're trying to stay ahead of China. Basically, we are we have quite a broad footprint in the energy management business. We are a presence in residential, commercial buildings for building management systems, energy infrastructure, utility management systems. We build software on the utility side to do the network management modeling. And we basically cover all aspects of demand side control and information management on the demand side. And on the utility side, the same thing. We're doing mainly operational management software for the utilities for smart grid management. Basically, we're a very sustainable focused company. We're listed on several of the sustainability indexes, and we have a educational outreach and also very interested in trying to electrify the non-electrified world. So that's the focus of the company.
Okay, thank you. So the whole idea of the smart grid is adding connectivity to the grid, obviously. But what role will broadband play? So high-speed data networks play with the smart grid, whether that's the connection at the consumer level over the consumer's broadband connection, or deeper in the grid where we're getting to areas where there's lots of data like sensors and that kind of thing. Maybe I'll start it off with Jeff, since clearly you guys want to explain why broadband is important, and then we'll kick it off to the rest of you.
Well, I think one of the premises behind the smart grid is that to take the residential case, where the utilities previously have had one data point a month, they're potentially getting one data point every 15 minutes or every 5 minutes or even every 1 minute, depending on how they've chosen to configure their system. And that, I mean, that's going to be a massive influx of data that utilities aren't used to dealing with. When you look at the distribution automation side, in many cases, I mean, Nick mentioned synchrophasers. Synchrophasers take multiple, I've seen numbers, 30 or 60 readings per second that have to be exactly lined up and sent with no latency and get to where they're going reliably 100% of the time. That kind of connection can't work over sort of a dial-up speed modem. You have to have a big broadband pipe. It has to be ultra reliable and secure. And I mean, everywhere you look, I think, in the smart grid, there's currently a significant amount of data, and what our experience with wireless networks more generally has told us is that if you build the network, they will come. I mean, there will be new apps that haven't been developed yet that become the smart grid equivalent of YouTube or video streaming over the internet. So video streaming that takes place over the internet. So I think that some of this is, we see now that there's greater demand for a bigger pipe, and I think everyone also believes that putting the infrastructure in place to create that better and more robust connectivity is going to create an incentive and opportunity for more people to develop more apps and cool solutions that we haven't even thought of yet.
You want me to go next?
Sure. Well, you're working with Silver Springs and not
Yes.
working with a telco network, so why don't you put your perspective out there?
Sure. Again, for us, we have, out of the 1.9 million meters we have as part of our immediate smart grid plan, we will connect 1.2 million meters. The meter, essentially, again, they are scattered, of course, being the residential meter, there are so many discrete meters. We would have, using Silver Spring technology, which is 900 megahertz, we will bring them into a nearest pole, maybe let's just call a repeater radio. From there, maybe 3, 4, 5 hops, we will take it to a nearest substation that we may have, which will have fiber optic cable. We would only bring the meter data from the house, only I would call where it would afford the latency. We don't want to have it make 20 or 30 hops for us to bring that information over to our billing center or control center or any customer center. Using maybe 6, 7 hops, we will bring it to substations. We have right now, as part of our plan, we have almost 30–40% of our substations already have fiber optic connectivity. We will bring our data over there. Then through the fiber optic, we'll bring to our Edison Place office, which is next door right here, or it will go to the control center or wherever else that we have to take. That is our plan of the broadband, essentially.
Okay. So, Arcady, where are we in this phase of broadband and the smart grid? So, O-Power started its company doing non-networking outreach to the consumer, so mailed bills, essentially. And then later on, you guys are moving more into, your different networking components and thermostats and all that stuff. So, where are we in this stage of deployment?
I think we're very, very early on, particularly in the residential space. You know, for us, you know, mail continues to be the biggest driver of savings in the way that we communicate to customers, and that's true even for customers who have smart meters. What smart meters means is that we can send a mailed report that is far more granular and specific in how you could save energy. I think that we will see more adoption of real-time opportunities to save energy and save money, and you know, we do things like high bill alerts, which is still a pretty basic function, but what it does is it's still something that you know, certainly didn't exist a couple of years ago. What we can do is tell you by email or text message on the 7th day of the month what kind of utility bill you'll get at the end of the month if you keep using energy the way you have been, and say, watch out, you're headed for a $200 bill, and that's 50% higher than last month. You know, in a certain sense, that's we think still a pretty primitive stage in that, and if you compare it to other industries, the kind of information that you're getting about your energy usage is quite limited. So I think we're still pretty early on. I think the potential there's enormous amount of potential there, and I think part of the potential is that when you're starting from a very basic stage where the amount of information that's available to consumers on how they're using energy in their homes at any given time and what they could do to save energy is when you're starting at basically zero, if you can provide a relatively small amount of insight, you can allow people to take a pretty big step forward. So I think that the challenges for a company like ours will probably get harder as we go on in some ways, even as the technology gets more advanced, because we're sort of picking up, I think, some of the low-hanging fruit in how people can save energy. The next steps may involve some tougher choices, but that will also be enabled by more real-time technology.
And then how far away do you think the digital home is? You guys have a deal with Honeywell to launch a thermostat. Like, when do you think you would see that market?
Well, I think the digital home is, you know, our company has not had a device-focused approach. So we don't imagine that there's going to be a single, something that you're going to pull out of your pocket that is a dramatic change in the way that people use energy. And what we want to do is reach people on the devices and the channels that they're already using. So if you already have a phone in your pocket, you may not need something else on the wall of your home or another device to carry around. What we really need to do is connect the information to the channels that people are already using to make it incredibly easy to make smart decisions about your homes. What you want is your phone to buzz and say, hey, it seems like you're not in the home right now. You could save $11 today if you just press this little red button here and turn off your air conditioning. You want it to be that easy.
Jeffrey, when are you guys launching your digital energy home product, or tell me about the stage of that?
I don't know when we're launching it. I wish we were launching it sooner than we have. The plan is, I mean, there's a digital life project that's been going on at AT&T for a while now, and the hope is to create kind of a unified platform in the home that will have a variety of the things that currently happen in the home and will happen in the future all on one device. So there would be home security and home monitoring, potentially telehealth and remote patient monitoring technologies, the types of energy efficiency and smart grid services that we've been talking about today. All of that put, as well as, you know, your video or your IPTV and your DSL service, all of that would eventually go through a single device. And to tell you the truth, it's above my pay grade to know when that's going to come out, but I know that there are a lot of people that are working on it, and I think it holds a lot of promise, because in addition to putting everything onto, you know, a single device for convenience sake, we get away from the idea that you have to have multiple things in your home to make all these things work. And there's recently been activity on Capitol Hill and at the Department of Energy around set-top box efficiency. And why do we have set-top boxes as well as DSL modems, as well as potentially some sort of fancy communicating thermostat in our home when we could have it all on a single device on a residence by residence basis? That's going to save an immense amount of money.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the hurdles to this ecosystem moving forward? Paul, do you want to talk about hurdles in terms of either incentives or slow-moving utilities or regulations?
Well, I think that, we need to focus on the different markets to answer that question. I think the resi market is what we've been talking a little bit about, and that's obviously a very important market because it's 30% of the power in the U.S., but 85% of the customers. So it's a huge market, and probably the one that cares the least. So, the consumer energy use and his priority is very, very low. What do they care about? Your utility, safety, price, and outages. And after that, there's not a lot of driver to drive you to energy efficiency. So one of the hurdles, I think, is really information, which is what was discussed with OPower here, and access to information. So I think that the utilities giving free and open access to the energy use information on a real-time basis is going to be a key driver to the market evolving, and take it out of the hands, not to say that the utilities shouldn't participate in that market, but take it out of the hands of the utilities so that you can have much more private industry participation from companies like AT&T, Verizon, OPower, Schneider Electric, and others. So the question is the utility going to manage the energy in your house, or are you going to manage the energy in your house using price signals and energy and usage? So I think price signals and access to information on the residential side are key. As you go upstream to the commercial and industrial markets, I think it's a different thing. Industry is very much aware of and managing energy today. That data is there. They have demand response programs, demand management programs in place. They have the automation to manage, so they're doing it today. They're big users, so the utilities are engaged with them. So I think the barriers there are really to let the utility industry open up around the demand management and demand response market, to bring some consistency in that market, some continuity in that market, so you can have all the load shedding demand management tools available. You can't have utilities that opt out of the program and decide not to do it. You allow customers, consumers that are in a national space to behave on open markets as a national company, like Walmart or Target or others. So these are the two of the big ones that I see. A lot of it is regulation on that side, and I think pricing signals and access to information on the residential side.
What about standards? Do you think the standards efforts are going well, and how important are those?
The standards efforts are going as well as standards efforts go, which is at a pace of a snail. So I think I would say that standards, today, every device we make, if you look at us, we're a very large electrical company, mostly electromechanical devices historically. None of that had any intelligence. The intelligence was you walk up to your circuit breaker and you see the switches this way or this way. Today, everything we make is somehow internet enabled, every device we make. So somewhere, everything is having intelligence. There's going to be a huge amount of data coming in. So, and I think Nick said it earlier, this is great. Data is great. We have a huge amount of data. It's going to be great for the broadband industry, and you're going to need a lot more data. A lot more data means a lot more data access and a lot more information. But the key is to get useful information, we're going to have some standards around the consistency of that data, how it's used. So how fast is it going? I think it's going slowly. Can it go faster? It's a very big industry consensus that has to move it. I'm not sure.
What do you guys think on the consumer or the home energy side?
Well, I think that I think for us, a bigger challenge than standards is are the right incentives in place for utilities to sort of deploy products and services like OPower's, and that's that's really a question of if you sort of break down what is OPower's business model. We sell a product to utilities. They pay us money to get their customers to use less of their product. How does that make sense? That makes sense if you have the right regulatory structures in place that essentially point at utilities and say that you're not just in the business of selling power, and we're not going to reward you for selling as much power as possible. What you're really in the business is selling energy services to your customers and meeting the demands of your customers. But what we should be, when we think about where's power going to come from, we can think about a variety of factors, but one of them ought to be cost. And if it's cheaper to work with your customers in a way that can have them save a kilowatt of electricity at a cheaper price than generating that marginal kilowatt, that's something that you want to do. And so getting that kind of a structure in place, and states vary to a great degree in how much they have or don't have that structure, I think is really, really important for unlocking. The utility industry is a very big industry. I think about $300 billion in electricity every year, and if you can change the incentives to say, hey, this industry is going to invest billions and billions of dollars, and they've begun to do it. Energy efficiency investment in the electricity and the residential sector, I think, is now up to about $5 billion a year. That's where the money is, and if you can create the regulatory structures that incentivize utilities to want to do this, we think that's very important.
Mm-hmm. PEPCO or PHI, we are already there. We are only a transmission and distribution company. We are not generation company anymore. And we have worked with our regulators over the last 4 or 5 years, where we have separated our rates just to be on the T&D rates. Means we have absolutely no incentive for us to sell more electricity. Means for us, we are already a step ahead than a lot of other companies, including maybe Constellation, which are like a generation, transmission, and distribution more as a traditional utility company. Again, for us, moving forward, we are not in a business as to how can we get customers' information and use that. We would be fine to whatever would be the mechanism out in the marketplace, whether it's through federal, state governments, and whatever may be other means, whatever would be the ultimate picture that would be created as to how customers, or for that matter, AT&T or Schneider or anybody else, can use the customer information and help them to save their energy cost. I think we are already there, at least from PHI's perspective. I think the biggest debate right now is what would be the privacy of that information, because customers are concerned, the states are concerned. We have worked with both Maryland and DC. They are concerned as to they don't want entire monthly bill information to be out into the internet, where anybody and everybody can see what is the pattern of the usage by the name and the address and whatnot. There have to be some other mechanism. Maybe it is maybe at a county level, maybe at a I would call subdivision level, maybe blocks by block level, where individual information is not sold out in the internet, but it is grouped in a manner where the customer privacy is at least maintained.
So I'm going to be a little provocative here and say I think that's a bit of a red herring. And the reason is it's not to say, first off, we need to separate privacy and security. So protecting the data that's transferred is about security and making sure it gets to the right place in a secure manner. That's a huge challenge for the utilities, because they have not historically managed data, and they're going to have to do that and put in infrastructure to do that. It's a big challenge. But by the way, a lot of other industries are doing it today. I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. I send a lot of information to Google. I'm not worried about it. Well, I'm not saying I'm not worried about it, but but it doesn't keep me up at night, let's say that. On the privacy issue, yes, privacy is important, and I protect, but I make my choices every day. And I would say a way to get beyond that is if the utility gave me the information right at the meter, it's not their problem. Then it's my choice on what to do and how to protect that data, and then it becomes a security issue. So I would say that access to information is key to accelerating the market and allowing the people that understand and know how to manage the consumers are actively and readily engaged, allowing them to have access to the information to make the choices. And what the utilities should be doing, as I think we've all said here, is price signals. You know, I will make my, you know, what is the utility doing? It's custody transfer of electricity for a price. And if they give me price signals for my behavior and I can then use tools on the other side to management, I will. And by the way, since it's a low priority, I want to integrate energy management with a lot of other things in my home, a lot of other consumer services, whether it's security, whether it's my grocery list, whether it's my communications and my systems. That's the value to me, and energy is a small piece of it, which I can drive on price signals from the utility. So yes, privacy is a concern, but I'll make that choice along with everything else. So I don't think that should be slowing down this market.
What do you think, Sunil?
Well, again, I mean, we cannot just go out and give out your information. And again, this is not Paul, but it could be any customer, ABC, Intel. This is his usage pattern over to Google or AT&T or Microsoft. We are guided by what are the local regulations. We do work, we have written volumes and volumes of how best we could achieve better efficiency at DC or Maryland, for that matter, New Jersey. And right now, the states would have to tell what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I believe that we are still maybe months to maybe a couple of years away before we would have maybe state by state level, or for that matter, federal level consensus as to how best we can move forward. It is not just utility that we can say, okay, let's do it. We are guided by, our bills are paid by customers, and we are guided by the regulators.
So AT&T is here to help on this question. Over the last year, there have been a variety of conversations and proceedings with different state PUCs, which, as Sunil has said, govern the privacy or have jurisdiction over the privacy of their electricity customers in their jurisdiction. And they historically have told utilities what to do in this space, and it's been regulated on a state-by-state basis. And one of the sort of broad impediments that we see to rapid uptake of smart grid and home energy management services has been this concern about jurisdiction by jurisdiction privacy decisions. And for companies like Opower, or at some point in the future AT&T or Verizon, which currently has this product in beta testing, it's a lot easier to have one set of rules that you comply with across the country, instead of saying, well, in Rhode Island it's this, and in Colorado it's this, and in California it's something else. And what we're currently involved in is an attempt to put together an industry coalition that will include utilities and communications providers and hardware providers, as well as third-party service providers like Opower, to come up with a sort of set of industry best practices around privacy that we can then take to all of the different state PUCs out there and say, look, we have this, we're in the business. I mean, AT&T has been in the business of privacy for a very long time and has a strong, robust privacy policy, and a lot of the other companies in this space do privacy very well in very complicated, interconnected, communications-heavy arenas. So what we hope to be able to do is say to all the different regulators out there, look, we've got a group of companies here that have signed on to these robust privacy best practices that have meaningful sanctions for people that violate them. Let's treat that as a safe harbor for the companies that have signed on, and not have, do what you want for the companies that haven't signed on to those best practices, but for the ones that have, treat that as what they need to do to ensure privacy, and get that impediment out of the way. So that's one of the sort of systemic issues that we're hoping to fix.
Okay. I'm going to open it up for questions. Okay. Or should I be doing this?
I'll speak loudly. Good morning. I'm Stephanie Joyce from Eric Fox in the telecom group. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to stray ever so slightly to a closely adjacent topic, and that is broadband over power lines. Thank you. The end of the go-go 90s, the FCC did a whole proceeding about it. Everybody was very excited about it. Nothing happened. Just about a month ago, the FCC released another notice of proposed rulemaking on BPL. And I think my question is most apropos for you, Sunil, and for you, Paul. Can you share with us your company's efforts, intentions, if any, with regard to broadband over power line?
Should I go first, or do you want to?
Just go ahead.
Okay. Over the last 6 or 7 years, we have done, I would call, a pilot level testing as to how best we could use broadband over power line. We had a facility we had installed in Rockville area. And what we felt as our smart grid vision broadened and solidified, we felt that one of the important things for our smart grid to do would be distribution automation. And the very line that we would like to automate, if we are carrying our communication on the very same line, and for some reason it is out, if it is like disconnected, a tree fell on that, and it is not carrying the communication, along with it's not carrying the power either, it will not fit very well into our broader scheme of the smart grid. We also looked at the efficiencies and whatnot, and we felt that compared to the vision that we have today, the Silver Spring network from meters to the pole, just using that as a wireless medium, and then essentially carry on from our substation out with fiber, we felt that is the most cost economic, as well as it is more foolproof method.
So I would say today Schneider Electric does not have any broadband over power products, although we are the largest electrical distribution company in the world. We did have a company about 7 or 8 years ago, a startup in Europe that we ran for about 4 years, trying to make a business of that, mainly using that as a communication method inside homes and inside small businesses to manage, do energy management in those facilities. It's just that we were never able to get enough traction with the market given the other technologies that were out there that existed, and we really shifted our focus onto wireless and Ethernet technologies. So it's just, there's so much momentum behind those other technologies from a practical standpoint. What you have to invest to put that technology inside the components did not seem like a viable alternative. If something happens and there's specific applications that it becomes viable, we would certainly be interested. And I would have thought something like substation automation could be one, but there's the example of why wireless is a better solution. Trees don't break wireless.
Well, they do maybe at times.
It has to be much more. It
not.
has to be much more directed.
Right.
I live in New Hampshire, so I can tell you that we had a lot of tree and wire problems in the last weeks.
Hi, Jeff Marks from Alcatel-Lucent. At the risk of having you go back quite a bit in the panel discussion, one of the things that I'd like, and this is for anyone who wants to take the question, a little more, I guess, information on is why broadband in the case of smart grid. And the reason I ask is because you look at the fact that it used to be someone just walking up to your house once a month. It seems like to dribble some information every 15 minutes or half hour might not need high-speed internet to sort of greatly improve where we were not too long ago. So if you can, I guess, discuss when broadband is necessary or important for this effort.
Yeah. Go ahead. Well, at least from the utility perspective, a lot of utilities 10 years or 15 years ago, they had tried meter solution, which was drive-by meter solution. And all these utilities have to essentially take that out because technologies has improved. We, of course, as part of our smart grid, and when we were putting our metering solution, we thought, what is the most economic way to do that? And we felt we could go with some other technology other than Silver Spring, which will be just enough for us to bring the meter data every 15 minutes or every 1 hour and bring it over to our control center. We could have had that solution very easily, but we would have kept out. We would not have any margin, suppose 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, if we say we want to do some other things like maybe home security or maybe work with AT&T or do something else, we felt we will be kept out from the day we install that. And we knew that is not the best way to go after. That is why we went where right now we are barely using 10% of the capabilities. We have 90% available. We don't know what the future would look like, but we have the capability nonetheless.
I mean, I think, sort of at a 30,000-foot level, if you think about how electricity is delivered, it's delivered in real time. It's not like home heating oil or gas in your car where you fill up a tank and you stop filling it up when the tank's full and come back when the tank's empty. It's delivered in real time, but remarkably, the industry has gone on for decades without the utilities actually knowing how much any particular home is consuming in real time. And I think what merging broadband and the grid is really about is about adding real-time communications to real-time delivery, and I think that will make available a set of services to people that some of them are not imagined yet, but I think you can see the analogs in other industries. For example, in cable television, for a long time, people were getting lots and lots of channels, but the sort of channel guide that's integrated into a set-top box, that actually is relatively recent. People had 100 channels before they had channel guides. How did you figure out what to watch? They had the back page of the newspaper. You'd get that information once a day, maybe, or maybe you used TV Guide. But now, it's just integrated into the television so that both the delivery of the information is real time, but the communication about what's being delivered is also real time, and that makes the experience better. And I think that's the direction that the grid is moving in.
I think you have to also, again, separate the consumer from the operational requirements of the smart grid industry. Someone said earlier that the smart grid means a lot of things to a lot of people. From a consumer, you're thinking about, I'm going to see my energy use and I'm going to be able to manage it better, and whether that applies to a residential or industrial or a commercial building. On the operational side, there's another big trend that's going on around the integration of renewables, distributed generation, and all of a sudden there's going to be an intense management and very high speed management for reliability, for frequency response, for spinning reserve, and how you back these things up. This is more than just saying, please shut off something in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. This is like 15-second response is what they're looking for. And reliability data is intense. So you're going to all of a sudden have a huge amount of data that people are going to have to manage on a real-time basis. So as we talk about renewables, distributed generation, it's going to put a huge information burden on the operational side of the business, which is separate from what we're talking about on the consumer side. So there's two areas where you're going to see some big shifts in this market.
Hi, Paul Barbiala, reporter, BNA. Perhaps a question for the entire panel. What specific steps should and perhaps could state regulatory commissions take to change the incentives for electric utilities to invest? Because this is really a lot about recoverable costs. So.
One of the things that we've been talking about for a while that state commissions could do is to rationalize the treatment of smart grid investments. Most people in the room, I assume, are familiar with sort of capital investment versus operating expenses. Utilities get a rate of return on capital investment, but don't on their operating expenses. And traditionally, especially for things like the communications, to the extent that a utility is using commercial communications for their smart metering solution, those expenses have not typically been treated as a capital investment, which in turn means they don't get a rate of return, somewhat less incentive for the utilities to go that route in the first place. So one of the things that we've done is to bundle a package of both the meter and 10 years of communications, so the utility can take that to their state commission and say, look, I am putting in a smart metering solution. I've essentially prepaid for the communications capability for the next 10 years. Let's treat that as a capital investment that I get a rate of return on. So you then have a better incentive for the utilities to adopt sort of the newest state-of-the-art metering solution. Another thing that they can do is, like I was talking about earlier, rationalize and make more uniform across the country the privacy rules and privacy and data access rules.
Yeah, I mean, to build on Jeff's points, I think that being able to rationalize the investment that they're making in smart grid is important. Privacy is important. We also think that having the right incentives to do efficiency is really important, and that's basically a combination of two kinds of policies that a lot of states have adopted. One is setting goals, and that's basically energy efficiency resource standards, and saying to utilities, these are your goals for efficiency over time, and come up with plans on how to meet them. And then two is on how utilities are compensated, and something Sunil talked about a little bit earlier, and there's some different models there, from decoupling to incentives to do efficiency to lost revenue recovery for how much money could we have made if we generated and transmitted this kilowatt versus saving it. But if you put those two things together, ambitious efficiency goals plus a way of compensating utilities that is as generous or more generous than generating and transmitting the electricity, it's a very powerful combination, and states that have that combination have achieved a lot in terms of efficiency and developing the products and services that take advantage of the smart grid.
I think there's another thing here on the utility side. I absolutely agree with what he's saying. I think decoupling is a great example of states that have done some things to move that forward. But there's a lot of models that can be used, and certainly they're way underutilized. I think 20 states not even have decoupling today, and you see flat energy intensity growth in California. Why isn't everybody doing this? It's a very successful model. But the other side of it, there's been a lot of pushback on this smart grid installation we've all seen in the news. I think the utilities themselves have not done a good job of benchmarking and understanding what the real value and payback of these systems is, and then they've been unable to communicate that to the customers. So I think there has to be a lot of work by the utility industry to step back, and there are some good examples from the stimulus funding. I heard one from Vermont last week where they got $67 million, and they can go through, as you know, Vermont's a small state and it's certainly not California or Texas, so let's, to be fair, but they can go through and they can tell you what the payback was and how that impacted the customer experience. Okay, and I think most utilities are looking at it from a very operational perspective today, and because of that, they're unable to communicate to their customers, ratepayers, why that's a benefit. What Vermont said is they went from, again, I live in New England. My power was out for 4 days last 2 weeks ago. I was here. My wife wasn't happy, but the real problem was, I live in New England. Trees fall down. I accept you're going to lose power. That's life up there. We all have generators. We can make it work. But What I want to know is, when am I going to get the power back? And what Vermont did is they set up a system to communicate directly to their customers to tell you, yes, the power's out, yes, the trees are down, and here's when the power is going to come back. And by the way, all that's a result of this smart grid investment. They went from, what he explained is they went from one situation where they had a snowstorm with the same amount of outages, where they had 150 complaints, to the next one, same exact thing, same length of outage, where they had 150 compliments and no complaints. So it's just, again, I think that the utility has to do, a better job of being able to understand and relate this to what the customer experience is.
Last but not the least. In fact, we have done that. When we have gone for convincing the Maryland PUC as well as the district PUC, we have shown them the benefit, the 10-year plan. We had rolled our communication cost as part of the 10-year cost and the benefit. We had done that. DC and Maryland, they approved our smart grid investment only because we had got the grants from DOE. Without that, even though we had a good cost benefit analysis done, again, maybe that is the believability, but the PUCs, they did not believe our numbers. But when they saw our cost could be reduced by half if we get the money from DOE, it was an easy business case for us to sell. We could not still convince the state of New Jersey. They are still wrangling as to what are the real benefits and all. And going back to your real question, at least where you started, we have the transmission investment. When we do any transmission, because it is conceived so important, we get automatic rate of return, which is already allowed us to, for us to earn. For distribution level, we have to go every year for every investment that we do, and we have to get approval from the state regulators. If they can treat smart grid just like a transmission investment, probably across the country, this could go very smoothly. I think that is where the rubber meets the road. But we all know that it is not an easy task for anybody to achieve.
So just want to, because I agree with what he's saying, and I agree the investment is valid and that it can be made. I'm just saying that everything you heard is working with the PUC, which I can say the average consumer has no clue what's going on at the PUC. Right. So it's kind of getting beyond that branding, that communication to you as a consumer, a residential consumer, on why this is a good thing, even if it might cost more to begin with.
Hi there. Drew Bennett with the Department of Commerce. I think one thing you're all starting to get at is what my question was, and that was that from some perspectives, your industry faces maybe an intractable problem with needing to engage consumers who don't care, as Paul said. And then one thing you're hearing they do care about, though, is privacy and data, or at least a vocal minority at this stage. I think Paul just described in Vermont one solution to getting around that problem. But even in that context, I find it very interesting then that OPowers chose as a partner recently Facebook. So I'd like to hear more about OPowers' partnership there with Facebook and NRDC, and then hear maybe from the panel about some more kind of creative approaches to solving that problem.
So I think, with privacy, and I'll speak to Facebook in a moment, if you only present people with the risks, or if people are only becoming aware of the risks and they don't see benefits, it's not a debate that's going to play out well in terms of making these kinds of investments in innovation. And I think one of the challenges with the smart grid rollouts is that the benefits were very visible to utility companies in terms of managing the grid, reliability, being able to deal with outages. But at least in the first round of residential smart grid deployment, there wasn't a lot communicated to customers about the benefits. And when I say communicated to customers, I don't mean like this could have been fixed with a great PR campaign. The way to fix this is to show customers products and services that make their experience of as consumers of energy better. And that's what we have in other industries. So when you're driving and see real-time traffic information because it's coming, that's maybe coming in part from the GPS data on AT&T's phones, the value of that aggregated data and what it's able to provide you in terms of a service is there, and there hasn't been as much to point to in the smart grid deployment. We hope we're part of that. What the Facebook partnership basically is if our product depends on comparing you to your neighbors, this will allow you to compare your energy usage to people who opt in to sharing it in their friend networks and share tips and share ideas. And we're hopeful there'll be a lot of adoption of it. And I think what you need when you move in that kind of a direction is you need to have the right rules in place. So for sharing your personal information with your friends, that will require opt-in. But being able for utilities to be able to take aggregated information to produce this anonymous neighbor comparison, we think that shouldn't require opt-in. So I think you have to have the right norms and right rules for the right kind of services. But mainly, you have to show people some benefits if you're going to start collecting radically more information about them.
Any more bright ideas about how to engage consumers better?
I think I would echo what he just said, that this is, to begin with, we are at the early stages. So it's now early adopters who are picking this up. They're people that, for whatever reason, have cared more and done more investigation and probably read more columns like you've written, Katie, about the benefits of these products. And as they get more widely known through both the press and through the attempts of the administration and through the success of the various programs that the stimulus grants have helped to get up and running, it will become more and more of a consumer initiative that people adopt because they're seeing positive results. But I think that on the one hand, utilities, for perfectly valid reasons and because of their history of operation, have not been typically out there selling this stuff as successfully as they might, because that's just not the way utilities operate. And as more companies get involved in the ecosphere and there are more positive stories to tell about it, and the utilities also get better at telling the story, I think there will be increased consumer uptake.
Yeah, and I think there's a market that's evolving here that involves more than energy. And I think the real key is that as a consumer, as a residential homeowner with a family, energy is a small part of what I want to deal with in my home. And I think the people that are going to be ultimately successful are going to be people that bundle a life experience through, whether it's your phone or your computer, with everything that's going on in the phone. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of kind of siloed development of things today. And as that evolves, everything will start to integrate, and energy will be an automated part of everything I do in my home, whether it's security, media, other services that we can't imagine today.
All right, I would like to thank all of our panelists, and we all look forward to seeing what the future looks like with broadband and smart grid.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Katie as well, and also our sponsors, Comcast, ICF International, Intel, Google, National Cable and Telecommunications Association, TIA, and US Telecom. Thank you.